Welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JM International. Get ready to explore conversations with those making a difference through music.
Hello and welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JMI, Jeunesse Musicales International, the global network of NGOs that empowers young people through music across all boundaries. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Giuliana, a dedicated researcher with a PhD in music education. She's passionate about ensuring that music education is inclusive, diverse, and impactful. She currently serves as Director of Education and Equity at Music Workshop, a nonprofit that provides free, culturally responsive music education resources to schools. Our conversation explores the importance of open-earedness, the ability to listen without bias, and how it shapes both music education and our understanding of different cultures. We discuss the PERMA model of well-being and the role music plays in trauma healing, as well as the fascinating difference between playing and listening to music. We also dive into the impact of AI on the future of music, and, on a more personal note, she reflects on how she always returns to Bob Marley albums since her childhood. As always, if you enjoy our content, don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate the podcast. We hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. First, can you share a little bit about your journey into music?
Absolutely. I feel very fortunate to have my life revolve around music because growing up with parents who both experienced a lot of illness, I spent a lot of time as an only child by myself, worrying about them, taking care of them, and trying to find inner peace, I think. So when it came to what music meant to me, it really was my best friend. It was my therapist. It was my play companion. When I felt painful, challenging feelings, I would think about the way certain albums would make me feel normally. And that was associated with like album art on the CD covers. And I would go to my parents' collection of like 200 CDs and I would choose an album that I knew would help me either feel good or understand my feelings better and wallow if I needed to. So as a child, without really knowing what I was doing, I turned to music to, I think, just normalize life. There was a lot of solitude and it was there for me. And Bob Marley in particular was like my best friend. And it was really empowering to hear him across like 4 albums. I can tell you that I had memorized 4 albums worth of lyrics by the time I was 6. So it really felt like I was sharing life experiences with him, telling me that things were going to be okay, but then also talking about these global issues that my little child mind could not understand. At the same time, the way that he applies musical concepts and instrumentation to his lyrics, as much as I don't really know, at least when I was a child, I don't really know the full context of the song. It's like I could feel the sentiment of what he was talking about, and I could feel his discussion of challenge and triumph, and it propelled me forward past, I would say, a lot of temptations to go in other directions with my inner pain. So when in 4th grade I started learning viola, my mom chose that instrument for me because I'd have more job opportunities when I was older, and that's totally true. But eventually I found that the instrument itself just wasn't giving me the same catharsis and the same joy that I was getting from my music listening. And eventually in college, I decided that I was not going to become a violist professionally because there just was a missing component. And I think when I went into teaching after that, I realized it's because my music learning in school did not match my music learning at home. And I became really passionate about what that connection or disconnect is. And especially when I was teaching my students, I did K-5 elementary school in California for about 5 years. And I developed my own curriculum. At the beginning of the school year, I would ask my students what they wanted to learn about. They're a very international student population. And so they wanted to learn about each other's countries. They wanted to learn about music across different historical periods, and they wanted to explore. And so I would build this program, which required hours of research to find activities for them to do and to find classroom safe YouTube videos. And I learned a lot about what it meant to move away from the traditional music education model, because I tried strings. I was a music teacher for orchestras for a little bit, and it just wasn't meeting that need for my students. And when I saw their reactions in class to the different cultures and genres and historical periods and modern musicians that I was bringing in, I was so fascinated by this pattern of behavior from my students that I went to grad school. I just wanted to know more. And originally it was for music and cognition. And over time, I really fell in love with sociology and psychology of music. And I think some of that comes from my hesitance with the neuroscience cognition world, still using a lot of research models that champions Western classical music for research studies, and which does not account for culture enough for me to feel like I could make moves in that space. So when I finished my master's, I went into the PhD for research, and I found that music listening really was where my heart belonged, and intercultural competence development, and how people use music for their own well-being, and what teachers could do in their classrooms to accommodate that. And eventually I was sought after by this incredible organization, Music Workshop, where I work now. I am the director of education and equity, and I have the immense privilege of building our professional development program, which is new. We are known for our free curriculum that is international, and we offer more than 35 online curricula for teachers. And it's basically like a 25-minute video that is really high quality content about an instrument, genre, culture, and music. And we work with ethnomusicologists, music educators, and musicians to build this material. And then it comes with worksheets for the classroom, and it's all free. Teachers can download it. We're in 103 countries. Actually, no, I think I just heard we're in 106 countries now, all 50 states, and we serve about 16,000 teachers internationally. So I'm immensely proud of our work. And for professional development, we now offer 4 courses to teachers on teacher well-being, because that's incredibly important. And we emphasize the role of music in self-care and musical care. And then teaching music for well-being, which is a 6-hour course for music teachers. We have the companion course, integrating music for well-being for general educators, because we really believe in a collective approach and a holistic approach to supporting student well-being through music. And then if teachers don't have time for that, there's a 2-hour version specifically on music listening for well-being. So my journey really comes from a personal challenge of being a traumatized child with adverse childhood experiences, system not being able to accommodate that in the ways that I really needed. And so dedicating my career to finding ways that I can fill that gap with materials and programming for the education system in the US and anywhere I can get my hands on, honestly, to support music as a tool, not subservient to other subjects or other purposes, but just the inherent capacity for music to heal. And what if children were guided through that process, like my parents gave me, and the agency to explore, imagine if students could learn to self-regulate because they learned how to apply music listening at a young age.
In the beginning of your answer, you expressed that as a young child, you already would go into your parents' music collection and pick these few albums that you knew that would help you in certain challenging situations or with certain emotions. Are that still the same albums that you use today or did they sort of change over time?
That's a great question. I definitely turn to a lot of them. I mean, it's a mixture of opera. My dad's from Rome, so opera is a big powerhouse in my family. It definitely has this ability to hurt and feel good at the same time. So I will turn to it in my most challenging moments where I'm really at a loss of emotionally where to go next. And then there's other albums like this Andean music group that we got the CD at a farmer's market one day when my parents used to sell glassware at the market, and I just obsessively listened to it. And now I listen to that when I try to channel my inner child. Yeah, I mean, it was such an expansive collection that I definitely turn to now as an emotional, I wouldn't say a crutch, but definitely a grounding tool. And then as I went through high school, I picked up more albums. Radiohead Kid A is a therapy session in itself from beginning to end. And that's definitely an album I will turn to. But I do think that listening to albums beginning to end is a lost art. And I for sure lean on that music now as some of my favorite because it's so near and dear to me.
What is the power of music listening? You also mentioned that even though I assume also loved playing an instrument and it also has a power, it was different and it didn't have that same effect. What is it in just pure music listening that is so powerful?
Well, the learning curve is definitely different. When you're learning an instrument, it is so easy to sound awful. And I can say this as a former teacher of children learning instruments. It's just a part of the process. So sometimes it can be a very frustrating endeavor. Even now as a musician, it can feel very frustrating. But for music listening, there's an ease and accessibility to it. And there's an agency in it where you can choose what you listen to. You can control every second of the experience. You can control the volume. You can use the equalizer to increase bass or to lower the treble levels. You can choose artists that align with your values. You can choose aesthetics, musical qualities that meet your emotions. Like I'm also a huge metalhead and I love Amon Amarth, for example, is one of my favorite bands because the guitar melodies are beautiful, but then you mix it with the growling vocals and the intensity of the blast beats from the drums. And it's like this cacophony of sound, but it's also this storyline because it's Viking metal. So it's like super epic. And it just, I could not produce that myself if I tried. So the power of music listening is really being able to meet your needs immediately because most of us have it on our phone in our hand. So if you've got a good pair of headphones or a good stereo system, then you're in. That's it.
One of the earlier episodes we did, one of the very first, was with Scott Rogers, who we talked extensively about the difference between hearing and listening, and also the ability to active listening. And he gave a workshop at YAM that we talked before the episode, the Young Audience Music Conference, about teaching children the ability to listen and active listen instead of just hear. Do you have a perspective on the difference between those? And I'm also sometimes worried, maybe you can say something about that young children, because so much music is nowadays consumed secondarily. And it's not only that people don't even listen to whole albums anymore. It seems like a lot of people also listen to music in TikTok formats for like just 9 seconds. And then the next sort of sound comes up. Is there a trend that you know about?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk about because there's some key terms here that I think are heavily underutilized. And this is my research brain that I'm putting on. But I think first, it's important to distinguish between passive and active listening. And there's other forms of listening, but that binary is really easy to approach from just a layman's perspective. And so when you think of passive listening, that's going to be in your grocery store. That's going to maybe be in the car. You're not really focused on it, but it's there. I would say that students, children are always picking up patterns. Their ears are always open. So even passive listening is going to affect children's taste. I mean, we enculturate children into the environment in which they're born and raised. So that's how they pick up patterns of familiarity in music. And that could be different scale systems. That could be instrumentation, patterns of lyrics. And that's going to drive their taste and preferences, but especially the active listening piece where you are actively seeking out music or it's on and you are paying attention to it. So those two forms really activate parts of the brain that other activities, especially in the arts, don't activate as much. And active listening in particular is going to fuel children's interests in one direction or another based on whether they enjoy the experience. And familiarity is going to drive more listening to that which they really enjoy. And so if students have the ability to explore music, and if they have guidance to know what it can do for them, then I think that it really can serve them beyond the TikTok clips. And we see why certain clips of music become so contagious because it sounds really, I'm thinking of a few in particular where they sound really intriguing or it's really funny. And you add a certain comical clip to a video and all of a sudden it's like way funnier than it was to begin with. And I think there's something to say about that because you're still training them into a musical system that is bigger than them. They're part of a bigger whole. But what I think we miss sometimes are some other features of music listening that are some of my favorite to talk about, which is when you get past passive and active listening, there's concepts like open-earedness. So if you think about open-mindedness to new ideas, to new people, it's generally a skill that's thought of as positive and mature. And so open-earedness would be the ability for a child or anyone to be willing to listen to something that they haven't heard before, that might sound weird, that is unfamiliar. And I can say that, especially having brought opera into an elementary classroom, it's really easy for kids to laugh at things they don't understand. Mm-hmm. And I think a mistake that a lot of adults make is to judge that and reprimand and be like, no, you're doing it wrong. And that's maybe where we get frustrated with the difference between hearing and listening, because if students are not trained to listen and then tap into what they're thinking and feeling and express that, they may become more used to reacting and not giving music a chance. So I do think that there are patterns based on where you live and what your community does with music. If you're really entrained into a community that listens to like one genre, and if the adults in that community tend to be judgmental towards music that is not what they like, then those children may be more inclined to dismiss it. Maybe they hear it, but they're not actually listening. To be open-eared means that you are really actively listening to something that you haven't heard before, and it's an open-mindedness level that we can guide students into by showing them that that next song that you hear could be an artist, an album, a song that you listen to and lean on for the rest of your life. What if you missed that opportunity? Isn't it worth taking a second to sit with it and then see how it makes you feel and then express what you think? And if you want to take that further, if you can guide that process, the next level could be cultural omnivorousness. And this is definitely an academic term, but I'm going to break it down. So if you think about an omnivore, they will eat anything, right? Meat, greens. And if you think musically, a cultural omnivore is someone that seeks out music that is different, that is new, something that they're used to, and comes from areas that are maybe not readily accessible in their community. I would consider myself a cultural omnivore because musically, I grew up with so many different sounds just by exposure of so much global music from my parents who are both international. And to me, it makes a lot of sense to hear something and think, oh, what is that? As opposed to, oh, what is that? There's a difference there. And what I want for kids is to develop this open-mindedness musically that includes going beyond hearing and going deeper into listening, where you're invested in it, you're giving it a chance, much like we would want them to do if they were meeting someone different. And we talk about respect, we talk about values, we talk about, especially in the US, we've got challenges with the, I'm using air quotes here, other, because we really can live in silos and miss out on so much tremendous opportunity for joy and catharsis and music that serves us and it becomes a part of us. But you have to get to the point where you're willing to listen beyond your first reaction, which could be negative, but what if that's just the intro to the song and then it changes in like 10 seconds and all of a sudden it's an amazing song? It's that patience level. And maybe that's at the heart of the difference between hearing and listening. There's a lot of layers to it, but a lot of it, I think, comes from encouraging sitting with discomfort and being willing to see what happens next. And then if you find joy in that, what happens if you seek out new and different music? Imagine what you could find then.
Is there research that shows that the open-earedness also translates to other domains? So does it actually translate to a more general open-mindedness or even non-judgmental approach to life?
I imagine that there is. I mean, the research on open-earedness is a very niche corner of music perception research. And the last I really dove into it was like 2015 to 2019. So if there's research done since then, I am now writing a note to myself to follow up on that because I think since I've been working, it's easy to miss advancements in certain research topics. But I know that when you think about research in music perception, even if the word open-earedness is not used, there's a considerable research in music and the connection to empathy and the connection to respect and the connection to identity development and qualities that align with open-earedness and how you're describing and understanding it. So I'm gonna look into that, but I definitely encourage people to go onto Google Scholar. And if you're a research-minded person, look up open-earedness, see what's out there. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I also think intuitively it makes sense, but it might also be just a little bit of wishful thinking. I also don't know if there would be causality or just a correlation. It might also be that people that are just more non-judgmental in nature, for whatever reason, also would more easily develop an open ear to music. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct on that is that when we're born, even before we come out of the womb, like up to 8 weeks before we leave the womb, our inner ear is developing. And as soon as we're born, we're sponges. And so we, depending on how much exposure we get as infants growing into toddlers and growing into young children, and then elementary, middle, high school age people, before we can really process opinions, we are processing musical patterns. So I will say that there's considerable research on the exposure to music, even when we're nonverbal, and how that translates into qualities like empathy, open-mindedness towards others, curiosity. I think qualities that really make up people that live in a pluralistic society. So I'd be interested in more research in that area, because I do think that it's rich with opportunity, especially right now when we look at global politics and the effects that that can have at the same time as children are developing, because they're also developing strong opinions.
Yeah, for sure. I liked also what you said earlier is about sometimes you need to listen to a song for a bit more than you thought before you start to like it. But I would even say that there are songs that you need to listen to the entire song or even an entire album where the last song actually is so much better in relationship to the rest of the album than it would be just as a standalone song. One of my favorite songs is by this German sort of experimental pianist / electronic music. But it's more of a piano song, and it's like a 7-minute loop, and there's like variety, but it's very sort of meditative. But then after 7 minutes, there's like this transposition in the chords, and it's like that does something every time I hear it. It gives me goosebumps. But what I wanted to do is like just go and listen to that 30-second segment, but it never has the same effect that if you actually listen to the whole 7 minutes. It just doesn't have the same effect. So you need to have that 6.5 minutes of repetition, for me at least, to have that sort of moment where it gives me goosebumps. And I hope that any generation or any person also takes the time to listen. And the question that I was going to ask, and we didn't actually prepare this before, but I was wondering if you have an opinion about this, whether do you think there's a risk in less and less of this with the increase of homogeneity of music with new AI models and AI music?
If you could be a fly on the wall in my dad's office playing around with AI music, I think because I single-handedly have experience in watching someone struggle to create anything that sounds good with AI, like literally so much of it was awful. You can prompt it to give you certain music and lyrics, and you listen to it and you're like, this is nothing like what I asked for. So it really is a frustrating process of even creating good AI music. I don't necessarily encourage this area of exploration in the music industry. I think it's an inevitability, but as far as homogeneity, popular music itself follows certain structures, I think, that really appeal to ears. And when you were talking just now about your favorite song, it really makes me think of expectation in music, and how with familiarity in particular, the more you're familiar with something, the more you look forward to it because you know what's happening. But even in that song, if it's so long and by the time you get to the part that changes, it's playing with your expectations. And so that is a lot of the reason why we can get such a dopamine rush from music listening, because maybe we expect it to go somewhere and then it doesn't. And that can be so exciting. Or maybe it does go exactly where you want it to, and that feels good. So I think a lot of AI builds on that sense of expectation and musical rules and systems that do fuel top 40 hits. So there is so much research on popular music structure and what makes it so catchy, and also what makes so much of it sound the same. I mean, you look at 90s boy bands, and to me, it's virtually impossible to tell them apart, because it felt like so much of their music was the same, and there was something to that. Sometimes there's a simplicity in it that I think our society enjoys, because it's accessible, it's easy, as opposed to high art music that is championed in so many schools for having such deep classical roots and can feel very inaccessible to people. So sometimes music can help us feel less out of touch, less disconnected from the greater whole. And I wonder if that does come into play with AI music because it's programmed. So the rules that it leans on to create music, and this is conjecture, so don't come at me if you are actually in the world of AI music, please. But based on my understanding of it, it's going to rely on rules and expectations to fulfill that, to sound good, to then hopefully motivate people to listen to it and enjoy it. But maybe there's a simplicity in it that's lacking the human touch, which is why I don't know of anyone, and I know a lot of music nerds who are actively listening to AI music. Like even auto-tuning had its appeal and then it wore off. And now it's like, oh, they're auto-tuning. So it could be just novelty right now. I don't see it lasting very long or replacing human-made music.
Keep that hopeful. and
I will exercise that optimism.
If we continue on the optimism, you also touched upon the power of music for well-being and self-care and self-regulation, and maybe also in relationship to young people and students. Can you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about our PD course because it's research-based. We work with, in total, we worked with about 8 faculty in music education and general education and researchers to build this 6-hour professional development that starts with fundamentals of well-being. We use the PERMA model from Martin Seligman, who is like the father of positive psychology. And the idea is that we want to do more than just not be miserable. We want to thrive. We want to flourish. And so what would it take for us to cultivate that in ourselves and in each other? And his PERMA model breaks down 5 components of well-being that are positive emotions for P, E is engagement, R is relationships, M is meaning, and A is achievement. And so if you could focus on those 5 areas of your life, theoretically, you could learn to thrive and not just not be miserable, which I think is a good goal for us. But it's so easy as adults to just aspire to not be miserable that we forget that we can actually attempt to grow into areas that are just positive. So for teachers, what we came up with is this idea that if teachers are already mandatory reporters in that they are trained to identify signs of neglect and abuse, report it to Child Protective Services, bring in other stakeholders like administrators and school psychologists, there's a certain level of concern that teachers work with to identify students at risk that really need support. And at the same time, there's populations of teachers who work with populations of students where there's a level of struggle that's not quite a CPS call, but you're still taking that emotional baggage home with you as a teacher. And as a child, that's still a level of not okay that could become physically integrated into their body as symptoms of trauma. Adverse childhood experiences and research in trauma show that when not addressed, children can develop into adults who have chronic illnesses or psychological disorders, sociological disorders. Trauma is, I think it's the American Psychological Association or Pediatric Association that says that childhood trauma is the greatest unaddressed health risk in the US. And I think a lot of that is because of what happens when children persist with that trauma and don't get the intervention they need. And so music, when utilized appropriately, can support students in regulating their nervous system, in meeting their emotional needs, in being able to retrain their fight, flight, freeze, or fawn reactions that are they're evolutionarily trained into our bodies. Like we, as a human species, are programmed to identify threats and prepare ourselves to manage upcoming threats. And we may not be hunters and gatherers anymore, but that doesn't mean that our more primitive parts of our brains aren't constantly doing those same things and trying to prepare us. And so hypervigilance for children in particular is a constant awareness of the environment, preparation for challenges, and being hyper alert and engaged at all times. But that also requires the nervous system to be constantly activated. And sleep and rest are incredibly important in disrupting what hypervigilance does to the body, which is it's just constant toxic stress all the time. And so when we teach teachers about the connection between music and well-being, what we're trying to show them is that you never know which children in your classroom are traumatized. You are going to see symptoms of trauma because student behavior, especially with aggression, is often a symptom of trauma. And if that is addressed through disciplinary action, in the US in particular, that is part of the cause of our school to prison pipeline, other than structural racism. But along with that is this belief that children who behave poorly, it's like they're choosing to do that. And if they don't listen, then they should be disciplined. And disciplinary action, ironically, often requires them to be removed from the classroom and their community and their safe space and their teacher. And then that snowballs into more punitive actions, which then could result in juvenile detention, which then increases the likelihood of them going to prison. And so we see research that shows if we instead interrupt the childhood trauma process in the body, those reactions to trauma, like aggression or social thinning, which is the people in your life, you allow them to leave. If they find things difficult to be friends with you, especially for kids who don't really know how to socially integrate, they're going to lose friends. And so they're going to become isolated. And that isolation reinvests their thoughts into the idea that there's something wrong with them. And there's a lot of different ways that children react to trauma. Music can help retrain some of these parts of our brains. And for example, one of my favorite parts of what music does is it reaffirms who we are. Our musical choices are like exercising our personal identities. And you find this a lot with kids who listen to heavy metal or punk, that there's this ability to meet their emotional level and create catharsis and reduce aggressive behavior because the music is meeting their needs in a way that allows their nervous system to relax, and then they don't have that impulse anymore to act out. I'm not saying that this is how it works for every child, but for our professional development, if teachers can learn how to guide the process of music listening and discovery by exposing students to a lot of different kinds of music and by valuing student interests in the classroom and bringing into the class music that students like, they can bridge that at-home musical behavior with the in-school musical behavior and find that students want to come to school more. Attendance increases. Investment in the teacher's instruction increases. Engagement in class activities increases. And that can be as simple as if a child is acting out, do you have a corner with headphones and maybe an old iPod with music already programmed into it and some cushions? And can you, instead of saying, go to the principal's office, you're driving me crazy, say, it seems like your body has a lot of energy right now. Would you like to go into the corner and go listen to some music? And imagine if they could retrain their own behavior. And as teachers, imagine if we could give them the tools to not feel helpless in the face of increasing, challenging student behavior and signs of trauma.
What has been the response of the teachers that have gone through this program?
It's honestly, when I read the feedback that we get, my team and I end up just emailing each other with 1,000 exclamation marks because we're so proud and excited about the response, because teachers are coming to us at the end of the course now and saying, I have been teaching for 15 years and I am rethinking all of my assumptions about student behavior. I am seeing my students differently. I'm seeing my purpose as a music teacher differently, or as a general educator. I see so much more opportunity to connect with my students now, and that my class can be fun when I've been spinning my wheels wondering why getting them to write an essay is like a torture device. The teacher's feedback that we get from the course is exceptional. And it feels like there's something really special there, because I don't expect credentialing programs to prepare teachers for the kind of existential crisis that we find ourselves in, especially post-COVID, where students are just generally so dysregulated. But to know that they're thinking about their purpose as a teacher differently. And for music teachers in particular, I just love that they are realizing the importance of the personal connection to music, when so many ensemble teachers in particular, we get ingrained in the performance directive. You know, you rehearse and you perform. And in rehearsal, it has to sound a certain level and quality so that you can perform it. But for so many students, that doesn't meet their needs and they quit. So what does that retention look like? Well, it looks like investing in student interest, incorporating student interest, and cultivating a lifelong love of music, whether or not they become professional musicians or hobbyists. So our teachers are really, I'm just so proud, because they're redefining themselves as a teacher, and our materials are helping them feel more capable. And I couldn't ask for anything more. And for any teachers listening, it's musicworkshop.org.
Is this limited to a certain age group? And I'm talking about not the teachers, but the students. Or is that not as relevant as it might seem?
Oh, it's definitely relevant. And teachers of different age groups can tell you that there are patterns. And there's research that supports this. And it's a really interesting area of music perception research, because I believe one of the main researchers, his last name is Hargraves, and they've done longitudinal studies on students' open-mindedness to music. And it follows a lot of the same developmental benchmarks in child and teen development. So, for example, up to around, I think, like 4 or 5, children are mostly just open, like, yeah, whatever. I mean, toddlers in particular, they become very self-invested. So they might have a very strong backbone and have a very clear idea of what they want. And you'll find videos of toddlers who are like demanding a certain song because they know what they want. And that's because developmentally, I think they're coming into this sense of ownership in their body, and they're able to speak now. And then as they grow up, between like 5 and 10, there's this sponginess to them, and they're more open to new ideas, especially musically. and they're less likely to be influenced by social norms or expectations. And so for music teachers, this is where we're going to find a lot of general music, because music appreciation, music listening is perfect for that age group when they are open to whatever it is you're going to teach them. And I personally, having been an elementary teacher, love that age group because they're just so delightful. They can definitely be cranky, but they're adorable. They're so sweet and open to ideas and impressionable. And if you can be a role model musically to them, they will follow in your footsteps. The next level is going to be at around 10 or 11. You'll find that social awareness increases. And so investment in what adults care about and think drops. And personal interests skyrocket. And especially going into the teen years, you're going to find students care a lot about what their peers listen to and what they think. And they're going to be open-minded, but it's going to be on their own terms. When you get to college level, again, we swing back to being open to anything and people and ideas. And maybe it has to do with a general increase in independence. But there's less judgment towards whether things come from certain adults, and it's more like a free-for-all. And then as you go into your 20s and 30s and farther along into the lifespan, your open-mindedness towards new music drops substantially, and you become more and more reliant on music that you've used and listened to the longest in your life. So it's really interesting to think through developmental stages of social awareness, hormone development, and that musical open-mindedness or open-earedness really does follow those same developmental stage patterns.
Is it only a relationship to these genres that you like or the music that you like in sort of the taste? Or does it also apply to how you use music in the sense that, let's say that I have never used music for emotional regulation. Can I still learn to do that later on? Or is there something innate in the music that just does that?
Yeah, I think that if you're consciously doing it, that's fantastic. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are doing it subconsciously, because usually our taste and preference aligns with how we use music. And even for people who listen to music maybe primarily when they exercise, that's still going to be self-regulatory because you're using it to increase the effects of the exercise and to become more engaged in that activity. So I mean, I'm not entirely clear on where research lies in these specifics, but I'm inclined to believe that even when we may not think we're using music for self-regulation emotionally, there are parts of music engagement that are kind of automatic, like dance music. There's a reason why people love to go to clubs and dance, because dancing is cathartic. There are neurochemicals and hormones that are being exerted when you're around other people, when you're listening to certain kinds of activating music, when your body is moving and dancing and exercising, or when you're relaxing and you're just listening to, lately, I was looking at my not Spotify, I don't use Spotify, but my Apple Music most listened to of 2024. And I was laughing to myself because I didn't recognize any of the artists. And I was baffled. I was like, who are these people? And then I realized that I tell Alexa every night to play ambient sleep music, because that is the only way my nervous system can shut down. And so my most played artists are people who I don't even know their name. And their music is like my crut at this point. That's not purposeful necessarily, but it's there. So I think that we can become more intentional, and that's what I would hope for a lot of us.
I also noticed that I use not even the music that I listen to as a diagnostic tool of how I'm feeling, because that would make sense maybe intuitively. But I noticed that certain times in my life, I really can't enjoy music the way that I used to enjoy it. And that's normally when I'm not doing so well, and not even that I'm aware that I'm like sort of like very down or something. It's just when I'm like overstimulated and I know that, I need to like take a break and hit that break quite intensely to make sure that I don't sort of spiral out of that. And music for me has been a really nice tool to see, like, can I enjoy music in the same way as I used to before? Or do I feel myself like just like listening 20 seconds and like going to the next song? And that's like I mean, it's very individual, but it's something that I notice about myself that I do if I'm not feeling so well.
Yeah, that is so relatable. I remember when COVID started thinking that I was broken, because here I am getting my PhD in music education, my third degree in music, and I could not listen to music. I was so emotionally spent all day, every day, that any music, it felt like it was so much sensory input, it was going to send me over the edge emotionally. So when I would normally turn to music when I'm in a devastated or sad or existential crisis state, this was the first time that I was like, what is wrong with me right now? Like, am I not doing music anymore? Like, here I am writing a dissertation on music, music listening in particular, and I can't even tolerate it. And even today, I can say that in the past 5 years, my music consumption has dropped considerably. And I think there's a lot of it that has to do with like the time and the place where I live. The US is weird right now. The world has been really weird for the past 5 years in particular. And as a person that continues to struggle with chronic PTSD from childhood, I am easily affected by inputs. So there is a concept called rumination. And we find in music listening research that music listening is healthy and good up to the point of rumination. And rumination is sort of like a compulsive obsession that you can't really control with negative thoughts and feelings. And for a lot of teenagers, we find that music listening is a tool for rumination. And that's where it really leans into the unhealthy territory of music listening. So when listeners right now are thinking like, well, isn't there bad music listening? Yes, there can be. Like, obviously, if it doesn't align with your body's needs right now, then don't listen to it. Like, don't shove it down your throat. But there is the point where you can listen to too much sad music. Now, the thing with sad music is that it's different for everybody. So there are people who will feel good because of sad music. That is totally healthy. That is totally normal. And there are people who find catharsis in sad music, also healthy, normal. When it reinforces the negative emotions and it doesn't allow you to break out of those emotions and it sustains you being in that negative headspace, that's rumination. And that's when maybe you choose a different genre, or maybe you choose to not sit and ruminate more with music at that time and find a different activity. That is something where, like, talk to your therapist. But in general, I think it aligns with this idea. And I've been hearing a lot of friends talk about an inability to listen to music lately because it's too much. It's just too much sometimes. And it's crazy to think, like, really, all music? Well, if I'm asking Alexa to play ambient sleep music, and that is literally the only kind of sound I can tolerate, then yes, clearly I am in an emotional state where I am still under construction and in progress and do not have the emotional bandwidth to relate even to like Bob Marley, who is my favorite. But if I hear one more person tell me that everything is going to be okay when I'm looking at the state of the world and like, are you sure about that? Then I'm going to make the choices that work best for my body right now. And lately, that's been a lot of nothing. And that's okay, I guess.
I'm sure it's okay. I think silence is also sometimes very necessary.
Totally.
For music educators or educators in general, what is the one tip you would give them?
Yeah. I would say remember the joy that you had in music when you were growing up, especially in your teen years. Like channel your inner teen or inner child whenever music meant the most to you. And when you walk into that classroom, be that person and imagine that you are the guide and captain of all of your students who are living in that time. And that helps frame national standards, curriculum, pedagogies in a human development perspective that I think may cultivate a stronger relationship with your students, a more genuine connection to music if they see you nerding out over your favorite music or being an inner child. It can help remind us that for music teachers in particular, we went into the profession for a reason, and we can easily get lost in the objectives of our curriculum when we may need to remind ourselves sometimes that music for music's sake is enough. Creating musical joy and giving students agency over their musical lives, guiding the process of musical discovery, it might feel curricularly underwhelming. And maybe there isn't a giant performance that comes out of it. But the investment of that kind of teaching and attention to students who are developing in a time when there is like an onslaught of information and options, that could be their saving grace. You might be creating their future nostalgic moments right now.
If people want to follow these workshops, or if they want to connect with you personally, or want to even read your research, where can they find the workshops? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. So musicworkshop.org, and you'll find our professional development tab there. We also have our free curriculum. I highly encourage everyone to check it out. It's great for up to grade 8. So I'm trying to do math here for the age. I think like up to 15. And explore music with your kids and with yourself. And if you're interested in our professional development, we also have scholarships. And anyone can reach out to me at Conti, CONTI, at musicworkshop.org.
As always, the very last question. What is the power of music?
The power of music is the ability to live a fulfilled and flourishing life because it's there with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for listening. If you want more information about JM, or you would like to get involved, visit www.jmi.net. At JMI, we are on a mission to make the world more musical. That's why we created Mubazar, a digital platform that helps us manage all our musical activities across 80 countries worldwide, connecting musicians with opportunities to grow both personally and professionally. If you are a music professional looking for a better way to manage and promote your music activities, check out Mubazar. Created for music organizers, by music organizers, Mubazar allows you to run music competitions, workshops, camps, auditions, masterclasses, awards, events, and much more. Mubazar offers custom application forms, payments for your activities, jury tools, translations, analytics, and more. Mubazar is fast becoming the best place for musicians to find and apply for music opportunities online, and you can sign up today for a free organizer account by going to www.mubazar.com, registering, and then requesting to upgrade to an organizer on the right-hand menu. For more info, don't hesitate to get in touch via support@mubazar.com. It would mean a lot to us if you could give us 1 minute of your time and rate and review the podcast. In case you have any suggestions or would like to be one of our next guests, feel free to reach out to us through the JMI socials.